The morning sunlight spilled through my floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished oak floors of my downtown apartment. I sipped my coffee, the warmth seeping into my hands, and adjusted the silk blouse I had chosen almost mindlessly. It felt like armor today. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop, and for a second, I hesitated, hoping it wasn't the message I feared most. It was them, my parents, the same people who, just a few years ago, had laughed at my tiny, cramped little apartment and compared it to their sprawling suburban mansion as if their judgment could define me. I could almost hear my mother's sharp laugh and my father's exaggerated sigh, the way they'd mock my choices, my taste, my ambitions. I looked around my living room, abstract paintings I'd bought with months of careful saving, shelves lined with books that had inspired me, and a sofa that I'd spent hours choosing because it felt like a reward for every struggle I'd endured. They had no idea. None of this existed in their perception of me. The message blinked on the screen again. "We're coming by. Surprise visit. Can't wait to see your place." I set my coffee down, feeling a quiet, controlled thrill. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, though I didn't yet know if they would recognize the woman I had become. Hurt, pride, and a little ironic satisfaction churned inside me. It was time. Time to confront the ghosts of their judgment and see just how far I had come. I remember that night vividly, even though it feels like a lifetime ago. I had just moved into my first apartment, a modest one-bedroom on the outskirts of Chicago, painted in soft grays and whites, with sunlight spilling through a single, narrow window. I was 24, full of hope but painfully aware of my parents' disapproval. They came over unannounced, and the moment they stepped inside, I could feel the judgment in every corner. My mother's eyes swept over the space like a critique committee, landing on the thrifted rug I'd saved months for, the second-hand coffee table I'd painstakingly restored. "This is it," she said, wrinkling her nose, her voice thick with condescension. My father laughed, loud and dismissive. "You call this a home?" I felt the lump rise in my throat, my hands trembling as I tried to explain. "I like it, it's cozy, and I—" "Cozy?" my mother interrupted, her laugh cutting through the air. "You can't even host a proper dinner here. Look at this tiny kitchen." The sting of their words cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to make myself small so they wouldn't see my flaws. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice in my memory, soft but firm, from the few months before she'd passed. "The world doesn't define you, Emily. You define yourself. Build your life, and let them see who you truly are on your terms." Her words had been a seed, a tiny spark I clung to. That night, after they left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls of my apartment, and made a promise to myself. I would prove them wrong, not out of spite, but because I deserved a life that felt like mine. One where my taste, my choices, my ambition were enough. One where the laughter and judgment of others couldn't touch me. I didn't know how it would happen or how long it would take, but I knew I had to start. That night, with a heart full of determination and a quiet fury that only grows in women who have been dismissed, I decided I would rise. I would build a life they couldn't mock, a home they couldn't ignore, and one day, I would be untouchable. The days and nights that followed were a blur of ambition, anxiety, and relentless determination. I poured myself into work, taking freelance design projects that barely paid the rent, but each completed assignment felt like a tiny victory. I still remembered my grandmother's words echoing in my head, "Build your life, Emily. Let them see who you truly are." They became my quiet mantra, my fuel in moments of doubt. I met Rachel, a seasoned interior designer in her late 40s, at a networking event. Her confidence was magnetic, and she recognized my potential before I fully believed in it myself. "You've got a vision," she said, leaning over my portfolio with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Most people your age are still figuring out if they're good enough. You already are." Those words were balm to the wounds my parents had inflicted, the first person outside of my family who truly saw me. I worked late into countless nights, sketching floor plans, sourcing materials, learning how to negotiate contracts, and navigating a world that often dismissed young women as inexperienced. There were failures, clients who backed out, designs that flopped, proposals that were rejected, but each setback taught me more than any praise ever could. Slowly, I began to see progress. My first big client, a small boutique hotel downtown, loved my design concept and trusted me with the renovation. That contract changed everything, proof that my talent mattered, and more importantly, that I could make it on my own. I kept this life hidden from my parents. Social media became a curated facade, photos of brunches, weekend walks, and occasional coffee dates. They had no idea about the high-profile clients, the deals I closed, the sleek apartments I redesigned into works of art. They only knew the version they thought they had dismissed. And every time I scrolled past my modestly filtered posts, I smiled a little. This was my quiet rebellion. Success lived in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Years passed and my business grew. I rented an office downtown, hired a small team, and even invested in a boutique property on the other side of the city, a project that combined my love of architecture and interior design. Each step was deliberate, a careful construction of the life I had dreamed of, the life I deserved. I learned to celebrate small victories, to find joy in creative triumphs, and to let go of the need for approval from those who had never believed in me. By the time I stepped into my office that morning, the same morning my parents texted, I had a sense of quiet power. My achievements were mine alone, and soon, they would witness the full measure of what I had built. The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected, echoing through the polished halls of my apartment. I straightened the sleeves of my blouse and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. It was them, my parents, stepping into the very space they once mocked, expecting to find the same uncertain, struggling version of their daughter. They entered cautiously, their eyes darting around, taking in the soft light spilling across the marble floors, the abstract paintings lining the walls, and the sleek, custom-designed furniture I had chosen myself. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and my father's jaw tightened as they surveyed the space. Emily, this is, my father began, voice trailing off, unsure how to finish the thought. I gestured toward the living room with a calm smile, letting them absorb every detail before speaking. The rug they had once dismissed as cheap, the lamps they had scoffed at, the small art pieces I had picked up on trips, everything now spoke of careful intention, success, and taste. The irony of their reactions, silent, stunned, almost reverent, wasn't lost on me. Do you remember, I said softly, the day you laughed at my little apartment? How it wasn't fit for a real adult. According to you. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. I'm glad you've come to see it now. Their faces betrayed a flicker of shame, but I wasn't finished. I led them to the office space adjoining the living room, where sleek shelving displayed contracts, portfolios, and awards, tangible proof of the life I had built quietly, away from their judgmental eyes. This isn't just a space I decorated, I said, voice steady. It's a testament to the years of work, the sleepless nights, and the doors I opened for myself. And then I dropped the final detail, the one that would leave them speechless. I also bought your house. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Their eyes widened, mouths slightly open, as they tried to process. My father's hands trembled at his sides. My mother's eyes glistened with disbelief. I what? My mother stammered, voice barely above a whisper. I bought it, I repeated, calmly, letting the power of the statement sink in. The house you mocked, the place where you dismissed my ambitions, now belongs to me. All legal, all finalized. Every corner, every wall, every floorboard. They looked around the apartment again, then at each other, finally understanding. Shock, guilt, and all warred across their faces. The laughter and mockery they had wielded as weapons had lost their power, replaced by the undeniable truth of what I had accomplished. I didn't need to shout, to demand recognition, or to prove myself with anger. My success, my independence, and the ownership of the very home they once ridiculed spoke louder than any argument ever could. For the first time, I saw them as mere witnesses to my life. Witnesses who could no longer belittle me, whose judgment no longer mattered. The air was thick with tension, but I felt an inner calm. I had arrived, and they were finally seeing the full measure of who I had become. I watched my parents stand there, frozen between shock and shame, and for the first time in years, I felt the power of my own choices. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting boundaries, reclaiming respect, and showing them the woman I had become. Now, I began, my voice steady but gentle. We need to establish some rules. If you want to be part of my life from here on, there are conditions. My mother's eyes flicked up, wary, and my father shifted uncomfortably. Don't look so surprised. You've had years to see the consequences of your words. Now it's time for action. I started with the simplest demand: honesty. No more belittling, mocking, or undermining. I've built this life on hard work, and I won't allow old patterns to creep back in. My parents nodded hesitantly, the gravity of the moment settling over them. Next, I set expectations for growth. You each have passions, dreams, or goals you've neglected. Mom, you always loved painting but stopped because you said it wasn't practical. Dad, you've had ideas for a business for years, but dismissed them out of fear. I want you to pursue them. I'll support you, but only if you commit sincerely. And finally, accountability. If you want to continue in my life, you respect boundaries and prove through your actions that you've changed. This isn't optional. You've had years to shape your behavior. Now, it's your turn to take responsibility. I could see the weight of my words pressing on them. There was no room for old excuses. No more judgment, no more superiority. I was compassionate but firm. I wanted them in my life, but only if they were willing to grow alongside me. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then my father's voice, tentative but genuine, broke the silence. Emily, I didn't realize how much we hurt you. Maybe we can try. My mother nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. We're willing to try, she whispered. I smiled softly, feeling a warmth that had been missing for years. This wasn't just power for the sake of it. It was the ability to guide change, to demand respect, and to foster healing. For the first time, I saw them not as the people who mocked me, but as flawed humans who could choose growth. And I had the privilege to decide the terms. Weeks passed after that day, and the air in our interactions gradually shifted. My parents, hesitant at first, began honoring the conditions I had set. My mother picked up her brushes again, painting vibrant landscapes that now filled corners of her new studio. My father cautiously explored business ideas, attending workshops and asking questions with genuine curiosity. Change wasn't instant, but it was real, and I watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. I, too, reflected on my journey. The laughter that once cut deep, the mockery that once made me doubt myself, had all been transformed into lessons. I had become a woman capable of creating a life on her own terms, financially, emotionally, and creatively. The apartment I had built, the projects I had led, the very home I now owned, all were tangible symbols of the resilience I had nurtured over the years. Sometimes, I'd pause in my living room, glance at the restored coffee table that had once been a point of ridicule, and smile. My grandmother's words echoed softly. The world doesn't define you, Emily. You define yourself. I had carried her wisdom like a talisman through every sleepless night, every setback, every quiet victory. My parents had grown, too, and with them, a tentative respect blossomed. Our conversations no longer held the sharp edges of judgment. They were filled with curiosity, humility, and even pride. They were learning, just as I had, that love, when coupled with accountability, could be transformative. And as I stood in the sunlight streaming through my windows, feeling the smooth silk of my blouse and the solid oak beneath my feet, I realized something profound. This journey had never truly been about them. It had been about me, the woman I had chosen to become, the life I had built, the boundaries I had courageously drawn, and the grace I now carried in every step. I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, because I had arrived. I had faced mockery, turned it into fuel, and emerged not just victorious, but unshakably whole. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, almost as a vow and almost as a celebration, I define my life. I define my worth. And nothing, not ridicule, not doubt, not even them, can take it away. Bottom of form.